Whether it be fan-made or official, you're likely playing a Pokemon game for one of three reasons: an interesting story, a beautiful region, or fun battles. But the ironic thing about the third reason is that most of the trainers you encounter don't serve much of a purpose other than giving you experience points to prepare for the few that actually matter. So what if I told you about a Pokemon fan game that makes every single battle fun? No Nuzlocking required, no randomizers needed, just good gameplay around every single corner. Well, that sounds pretty cool, but I bet it's just gonna be one of those super challenging difficulty hacks where you need a second monitor with dozens of documentation tabs open just to understand what's going on. Or maybe even one that changes so much that not a single system feels recognizable. Perhaps to your surprise, it's neither of those. Not only does this game have the most well-constructed gameplay systems I've ever seen in a Pokemon fan project, it also doesn't lose sight of other core aspects we love about the series. And the name of that game is Pokemon Tectonic. It opens in a very similar way to most other Pokemon games. Arrive in a new region, be greeted by a professor, and then choose your starter. Though, immediately upon interacting with one of these Pokeballs, you'll be introduced to one of the game's greatest features, the Master Dex. Somewhat contrary to what I said before, Tectonic does make a lot of changes to the Pokemon. As in, like, each of their move pools and every single move in it has been reworked. But, unlike many other games with a similar approach, almost all of the drawbacks that would normally come with such a heavy amount of modifications are eliminated thanks to this system. Whether it be in battle, in your party, in your PC, for a Pokemon you don't even own, you can view all of their stats, learnable moves, evolution requirements, type matchups, you name it. There is not a singular moment where you should ever have to need outside documentation to understand what a Pokemon does. Although, I know what you're thinking. Even with all this knowledge, I'm still gonna get blasted by the first trainer with some stacked coverage moves on all their Pokemon. Well, not really. The early game is extremely forgiving. You aren't going to find any fights that keep you from progressing just because you didn't min-max your team for them specifically. Though, I do suggest catching and training as many Pokemon as you can, and I'll explain why that'll pay off shortly. But before I move on to literally anything else, I want to talk about what's easily the best part about this game. See that trainer right there? It's got a Pokemon next to them, meaning they're ready for battle. A piece of this game's incredible route design, which I'll also discuss later. But more importantly, beating this trainer will result in one of two outcomes. If one of your Pokemon fainted during this battle, they'll recall their own in the overworld and remain in place. Upon healing at a Pokemon Center and then returning to the same route, they'll be once again ready for action. But if you win without any team members fainting, you'll perfect the fight, gaining EXP candies and never having to worry about that trainer ever again. This adds an entirely new layer of completely optional difficulty to the game, because you don't have to perfect every trainer. The respawning will be a little annoying in the game's sort of tutorial area, though unlocking fast travel removes almost all of the backtracking you'd normally need to do. And this system goes hand in hand with the Aid Kit, a key item that can heal your team, including fainted Pokemon, by consuming a charge that can be refilled at any Pokemon Center. If you haven't already pieced it together, this makes every route feel like a gauntlet of sorts, where you can return to the Pokemon Center and restock on healing, with the punishment of having to refight every trainer. But again, unlike every other game with a similar system, you can also choose the more difficult option of perfecting each and every fight, so you don't have to worry about that. This game just has a really hard focus of taking every gimmick from popular challenge or battle-focused fan projects and perfecting the literal crap out of them. But after hearing all that, I just know there's something on many people's minds. Wouldn't it be better to just leave these trainers unperfected? With how many more viable Pokemon there are thanks to the hefty changes, wouldn't it be more efficient to have a lot of trainers to continuously farm EXP off of? Well, No, actually, because this game solves that dilemma pretty well. Remember how I said, I think like 2 minutes ago, how you should train literally any Pokemon you can get your hands on at that point? That's because Tectonic will not allow a singular point of EXP to ever go to waste. Although there is a level cap, all the experience you would normally gain from a capped Pokemon can be later converted to EXP candies, and all of those Pokemon you caught and trained as placeholders, they can be placed into the donation box of your PC, returning you with all of the experience that you personally put into them as candies. But already 5 minutes into the video, I feel like I've maybe smothered you a bit too hard with the gameplay explanations. So I want to take a quick break and talk about the aspects that don't entirely relate to the Pokemon battles. As I said at the beginning of this video, this game does not abandon the other core concepts of the series, unlike a lot of other battle-focused ROM hacks, or sometimes even fan games. One of those concepts in particular being the adventure. The interesting part about Tectonic's region is that it's not open world in a technical sense, yet it has the same sense of exploration and quantity that a game like that would give you. Like, the progression is pretty linear, as you do most content in a specific order. There's just a really satisfying sweet spot with the amount of optional things to do in between gyms, to the point where it doesn't feel overwhelming, nor are the rewards disappointing for the work you're required to put in. Though, not only is the region plentiful and rewarding to explore, it's also pretty easy to navigate. As I mentioned earlier, trainers who are looking for a battle have their Pokemon beside them in the overworld. This gives you a nice opportunity to prepare for them, try and look for a way around, or just signify that, hey, your trek through this route isn't exactly over yet. The same concept actually applies to important bosses as well. 90% of the time, when you're approached by a wandering trainer, or when you talk to a gym leader yourself, you're given the option of whether or not you want to battle them, or take some time to prepare. And to a degree, this even applies to wild Pokemon. The encounter spots on each map have been purposefully constructed in a way where it's entirely possible to avoid them. I think the only thing that I could possibly criticize about the world is that I feel that some of the tile sets used sort of clashed with each other at times, but other than that, I'm quite surprised with how much effort has been put into the region of a game that seemingly had tens of thousands of hours put into the battle system. And before we return to said battle system, I want to briefly talk about the game's story. Tectonic sort of hits this weird middle ground, where the plot feels a bit elevated from what you'd normally experience in a Pokemon fan game, yet it doesn't really scratch the itch I guess I was hoping for. But to be fair, it's probably dumb of me to expect a free-to-play fan game that already landed so well with its combat and exploration systems to go all out on the story. Though I will credit that the side content really adds to the region's lore. I suppose that, alongside the what's next button, gives the player more of a choice of whether or not they want to care about the story. In a game where every NPC trainer has some flavor to them, most people would expect the actual bosses to have incredibly interesting rosters with some unique battle effects. Both of these are true, and the former is extremely easy to explain why, as gym leaders now specialize in 2 types instead of 1. But as for the latter, that's where things get very exciting. If you recall earlier in the video, I mentioned that the perfection system sort of adds a second layer of rewarding difficulty to every NPC trainer without having to make any modifications to their team. This does also apply to important bosses, though alongside that comes another item called the Tara Amulet. Upon activating this item, gym leaders in story fights will become harder through unique curses, like applying a debuff to your team, for example. So now you have 4 different ways you can battle every important trainer, each with their own level of varying difficulty without any on-paper modifications to their rosters. And while perfecting a battle battle gives you some extra EXP candies, winning with the amulet activated opens up entirely new content for you to complete. And don't be worried about being locked out of that content either, because you can actually just return at a later point and rematch the gym leader with a much stronger team. Though, another thing I mentioned at the very beginning of the video was that any outside documentation was completely unrequired for you to understand what a Pokemon does. This same thing applies to trainer battles as well. You can view the full team of any enemy trainer in battle, and of course access the further details of their Pokemon through the Master Dex. At this point in the video, one of the things I have to credit the most about Tectonic's gameplay is that you can choose how difficult you want every single battle to be, with extra rewards for doing so. You aren't locked to a challenge setting once you pick it, nor are you required to do something like a Nuzlocke just for a risk-heavy combat experience. Tectonic is absolutely incredible. There wasn't much doubt in my mind that I was going to enjoy revisiting it. I'm just more surprised that even after all these years, the game still feels fun, fresh, and engaging. Oh, and despite being a completed project for almost 2 years, it still receives consistent polishing updates, with one more big one planned for this year. So, with my final scores on screen, and feel free to pause and read them, I'll be giving Pokemon Tectonic a 9.3 out of 10. I can't really say it's a game for everyone, especially if you aren't a fan of heavily reworked battle systems, though it's probably the only fan game with such a level of changes that actually feels easy to pick up without prior knowledge of. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. I really tried to take a less artificial and purely informational approach this time around. I wanted to go for a more heartfelt review, where I sort of just talked about my personal experience with the game, rather than just listing off and explaining its features in the most get-to-the-point way possible. So let me know down in the comments if you enjoyed this format, or even what other types of Pokemon fan projects you'd like to see me cover in the future. Either way, thank you to my channel members for their continuous support, and have a nice rest of your day.